Hi, good afternoon. You all having fun? Can everybody hear me all right? I mean, I'm kind of deafened, so I'm kind of hoping you are as well. Okay. My name's Mark Boulter. I'm a program manager on WinForms team, which is part of the .NET frameworks. This is Fred Balsiger. Finally got it right. Fred is one of our lead developers on the WinForms team. This afternoon we're going to introduce WinForms team. So we've split this talk into two parts. I'm going to start by giving an introduction to WinForms, what WinForms is, what does it give you, and then after I've run through some of the features in WinForms, I'm going to hand over to Fred, because he's such a hardcore developer, he's going to stand in front of you and write code and show you how to build a simple WinForms application. So what is WinForms? Well, WinForms is a framework building rich client applications. It targets the Win32 API, takes full advantage of the Windows client platform, and it also takes full advantage of .NET framework. So it's a .NET framework that targets the Win32 API. It's also an architecture for controls and containers. So in the past with ActiveX, ActiveX was a very successful model for building controls and implementing containers. However, ActiveX is based purely on interfaces. If any of you built ActiveX controls, you may have found that there are some implementation semantics that differ between different controls and different containers. So a control that works in one container might slightly misbehave in another. We've addressed that in WinForms by actually providing an implementation of what it means to be a control and an implementation of what it means to be a container. Our base control class contains all the implementation that's needed to communicate between controls and containers so that you can guarantee that a WinForms control will work in any WinForms container and vice versa. Another important thing that we've done in one of our goals for WinForms was to provide a really rich, rapid application development design experience. So the runtime has been built with design time in mind. It isn't something that we layered on top, so we finished the runtime, now let's think about design time. As we've been building the runtime, we've been thinking about how we expose that in a really great rad design time. And also, we've actually built large portions of the design time itself. So later on, when I show you WinForms in Visual Studio, the forms designer itself is built in WinForms. The property grid that the whole of Visual Studio uses is built in WinForms. Large parts of the Server Explorer that you'll have seen in earlier demos is built using WinForms. So we've dog-fooded what we've built to make sure that by the time we ship it to you, it's a really good, robust, consistent, easy-to-use framework. So what are the important things about WinForms? Now you have an idea of what it is. Well, I think the first thing to talk about is no-touch deployment. So if you have a web page that has a link to an executable or a link to a WinForms control, when you click on that link and the executable runs, it runs with no registration. You simply click, controls downloaded into the assembly cache, and run. There's no GUIDs, there's nothing that goes in the registry, there's nothing that you need to do to the local machine. WinForms applications are versionable. Again, the common language runtime gives us a way to version application and make it possible to run applications side by side. So if you have you can actually run two versions of the same WinForms application or control at the same time on the same machine with no side effects. It gives you application robustness over time. And the final thing is that with the assembly cache, this cache that your X's and assemblies get put into as they get downloaded, it gives you smart caching. So you go back to the web page, you click on the link again, the common language runtime will check the version on the server against the version on the client, and if it's a different version on the server, it'll download that new version and you'll execute that. If the version's the same, it'll just pull it out of the cache and execute that version. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the best of being able to run stuff locally off your hard disk and having it just pop up immediately, and also automatic deployment of new versions of apps. So as your IT department or the people or the companies who are developing software for you deploy new versions of the verification, your client machines automatically pick those up. WinForms is secure, and what I mean by that is, again, the common language runtime defines a security infrastructure that includes code verification and code access security. So that when you run a WinForms application, it can perform no more than the set of operations you said that application from that particular place is allowed to do. So if you say a particular application isn't allowed to have access to the file system, and it tries to access the file system, you get a security exception. However, if you run that same application locally, it can be run with full trust and have more capabilities. And then the other important thing is that the WinForms is fully integrated with the rest of the .NET framework. WinForms are web service aware. It's very easy in Visual Studio to use web services from a WinForm, and WinForms are data aware. They integrate very well with the new ADO Plus data architecture. It's very easy to set up data binding in your forms. We've got an absolutely rocking data grid that allows you to do hierarchical navigation of relationships and so on. So the first demo I'm going to show you, if I actually manage to flip over the demo machine, so nearly as bad as operating my video player. Ah, you were close. I'll try that again. 3. There you go. There we go. I actually managed to do it. So the first demonstration I'm going to give you is I'm actually going to build a web service in C#. I'm going to take that web service and I'm going to import it as a web reference into a Visual Basic Client application. I'm going to execute the web service, get the information back from it, and display it in my WinForm. So let's just start by creating a new C# web service. So I'm going on creating the service on the server now. You see that I'm creating the root and that kind of thing on the server. And I'm populating my project. So we'll bear with it a little bit. My poor laptop's struggling. So you can see there we have my web service, and now I'm opening up the web service in the designer. And because this is a very simple web service, I'm actually not going to use a component designer. I'm just going to scroll down, and here I have a very simple web service. The first thing I'm going to do is create this method called Hello World. And in fact, Hello World is a little boring, isn't it? So let's try WinForms rocks. Rocks, I can't spell. How embarrassing. Now the next thing I need to do in order to let the common language runtime know that this is a web method that can be invoked via a web service is I'm going to add the attribute that just says web method. And this is all I actually need to do. So we can now build this, and you can see that's built successfully. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run that show to you running. So we can simply say view in browser, and I'm now going off to the server, executing the web service. And what I get is if I just navigate to a web service, I get this nice little default web forms page that allows you to look at the web service and discover information about it. So the first thing we can do is look at the service definition language contract for this web service. And this just describes the web service. It says what server it's on, it says what the name of the service is, and it's that it returns a string. So if we just go back, and I can actually go down and execute this. And this is all working in the Visual Studio. I could do this from a separate browser. And you can see this is actually returned the result from the method as an XML data packet. So let's close that down and go back. So now what we're going to do, having done this, let's just save everything at this point, is I'm going to add a Visual Basic project. There's a WinForms application that's going to consume this web service. So I've got my WinForm here, and I'm just going to go to the toolbox, and I'm going to add a label and a button. It's going to be a very simple WinForm. Fred's going to go over this in more detail later, so I'll explain to you exactly what we're doing here. So the first thing I'm going to do now is just go to the property browser, and I'm going to set the font for this a little larger so you can actually read it. So let's set the font to, I don't know, let's see, 16 point, and make it bold. And you can see the controls on my form, because I've set the properties on the form, they automatically get picked up by the controls. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to the Server Explorer and go into my server and down to my web services for this server. Right now I'm going back off and refresh it and looking at the web services I've got defined. And you can see here's my project here. Here's my web services I just added. And I can right-click on this and I can say add to my WinForm application. And this is now copying the SDL file into my client application and generating proxy for me in C#. We actually drill down into here. Sorry, in Visual Basic. We can see we've got the proxy there. So now I've added the reference to my project. I can simply double-click on the button, and I can come in here and I can just dim WS1 as, and you can see here's my web service that I just defined. And then we can simply say label one.text equals WS1 dot, and you can see I'm actually getting statement completion on the web service here. So if we scroll down, there's my hello world method that I defined. And there we are. Now we can simply build this and run it. I've done this so many times. The first thing, of course, I have to do is set the start project to be my WinForms application. And I've done that now. So now we can build that and run it. And you can see now I have my WinForms application run. If I click on the button here, I'm going back up to the server. Thank you. So I should have just done what everybody else does and put the clips on the toolbox, shouldn't I? There we go. So I'll run that again. And thank you for the kind member of the audience who pointed out to me that I can't even write a simplification. Of course, Fred wouldn't make that mistake because he's a real developer. So if I click on the button now, I'm back up to the server. I'm executing the web services page, packaging the result of that method as an XML data packet, and you can see it's back here as a WinForms rocks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to shut down this project. And I think Julia Childs is the American version. I actually have a project I created earlier. Which is, I'm now going to show, again, this is a web service that talks to a WinForm. This one actually uses an ADO plus dataset, returns an ADO plus dataset for the server. And great. So we'll start with my, this is my data definition. This is the schema for my dataset, defining that I have a table of customers. Customers has a customer ID, customer name, and so on and so forth. Now, what I have based on that data set is a strongly typed data set, which is actually a class which allows me to access the content in my data set in a strongly typed fashion. So I can actually come in here and you can see this again. This is in C#. I have a customer's data set that contains a customer's table. And then going down, I have my web service here. Oh dear, that was horrible, wasn't it? Well, at least you can see I'm really doing it. So if we just get rid of this, yeah, so you can see. So I've got a web method here in my class, list customers, which does a get customers. It returns a data set, so I create an instance of my data set here. I create a connection to my backend database. I create a command, which is just select customers. And then I fill the data set using that into my customers table. And I return that data set. So then if we look at my client application, and we'll look at the form first, so you can actually see the form. Let's get rid of this. So you can see I've got my form here. It's a nice pretty light blue color. I've got my flat buttons over here. And if we look at the code for this form, Don't know where that was. And this is a new feature in Visual Studio that allows me to clap my code to the function headers, and then I can just open it up. I thought it was pretty cool. It's one of my favorite features. So, and you can see this is in my client form. This one's written in C#, and here I'm creating my web service, and I'm getting the data set back from my web service, and then I'm merging that data set into the data set I have on my client. So if we now run this application, you see my form comes up. I click on the load button to load the data. I'm going back to the server again, executing against my SQL server, picking up the contents of the web service as an Excel data packet, coming back down to the client, and then actually using our data binding architecture to automatically bind this into the form. So I can move backwards and forwards here. Now I can come in here and let's type in a new zip code. Now we all know this is not a correct zip code. Even though I'm from England, I know that zip codes don't have letters in them. So click on save, and you can see I've got an error back from the server saying, see, you've made a mistake. So what's happened is data set's gone up to the server, my business logic has checked its contents, found the error, updated the data set with the error, attached the error to the data set. Data set's come back down to client and been bound into my form. And you can see here now I've got this little exclamation mark here, which is an error provider. It automatically binds the errors. I move over it, I get a tooltip telling me, and you won't be able to read that. It tells me that I have an invalid zip code, which of course we all knew. So, and you see here I've got my little flat buttons, which highlight as I move across them. I resize the form resizes nice, take advantage of the space. This is the advanced layout features in WinForms. So we'll cancel that. And go back to slides. So that was WinForms and web services. I did not get that the wrong way around. So WinForms contains a rich set of controls. It contains all the standard controls you've come to expect in a forms package: labels, text boxes, radio buttons, boxes. We have a link label control that looks like a hyperlink. You can set up the text that you want to be underlined. When the user clicks on it, you can handle that event and perform an action based on it. The property grid itself that you saw me use there is actually written in WinForms. So the property grid is a control that you can use in your applications at runtime. We have the standard Windows common dialogues, color dialog, font dialog, so on and so forth. We have a rich edit control, and then we have what we call ComCuttle-like. This is the Windows common control library that contains progress bar and the tree view and so on. What we've done, because there have been problems in the past with different applications using different versions of the common control library, you install one application, suddenly another application stops working because it's built for a specific version of ComCuttle. There are bug fixes. Those bug fixes unfortunately change the semantics, things break. We have our own version of the common control library inside WinForms. So we can guarantee when you install WinForms application, all of your other applications will continue to run. We won't affect them. When you install other applications that install their own version of common control library, your WinForms applications will continue to run. This kind of addresses some of the TCO issues around deploying Win32 applications. And then the other thing we have is a set of really great data controls. I showed you how any of our controls combine to data in a data set, but we also have a really great data grid, and we have the error provider control I showed you there. So this is my kind of laundry list of features. So the next thing we have is advanced graphics port. So the .NET framework includes a system.drawing package, which is implemented onto the new version of GDI+, supports alpha blending, brushes that are based on bitmaps, gradient fills, and so on and so forth. I'm going to demonstrate some of that to you in a moment. We have this feature we call web look and feel, which is maybe a little grandiose, but you saw an example there with the flat buttons, our radio buttons, our checkboxes, our labels are all transparent, so you can put images on the form background and have the image show through. It allows you to build a Windows application that has the look and feel of, say, Money 2000. We have advanced layout features that allow your form, the contents of your form, the controls in your form, to resize sensibly as font change, as the Windows font changes, or as the user resizes the form. Designer supports visual forms inheritance. So if you define a base class that, say, contains a company logo and an apply button, a cancel button that have standard behavior behind them, you can then derive all your application forms from that form, and you can open it up in the designer, and you can actually see the content of the base form and then overlay new changes over the top of it, or change some of the behavior of the controls on the base form. We have a pretty good printing story. We have the ability to create print documents, send them to the default printer, open up the print and page setup dialog, change printer defaults, all very simply and easily. And we also have a print preview control as well, which we can place on a dialog, makes doing print preview pretty simple. We've done a lot of work with the Microsoft accessibility team to make sure it's easy to build accessible WinForms applications. So you set a couple of properties on your form, a couple of properties on each of your controls, and suddenly your form starts working with screen readers and navigators and those kind of things. It makes it much, much easier than it has been in the past. And finally, WinForms is a very extensible architecture. Because we're inheritance-based, because we're framework-based, we have very well-defined points in the framework where you can enhance the behavior. For instance, you can take out button control if you don't like the way it behaves and change some of its behavior. It makes it very easy to take what we've got and add new features to it. Because we built the runtime with design time in mind, it's very easy to add design time behavior. It's very easy, for instance, to add custom editors into the property grid. And finally, if you need to, although hopefully you won't find a good reason to, you can drop directly down into Win32 pretty easily. So we allow you in a fully trusted application to get at the message pump, to get into the message loop, to process the messages, and so on and so forth. So, my next demo. What I'm going to show you here is a little GDI Plus application. Now, this is what was showing when you walked in. This is written in VB, written in Visual Studio. I'm not going to show you to you in Visual Studio because it meant jumping about in code too much, so I thought this would be easier. So the first thing I'm going to do, well, I don't like this grey background. Carried away with myself. Thank goodness Freddie's on the stage with me here. It's kind of like Laura Hardy, isn't it? So, let's start again. So we have this kind of dull, grey Windows form. Well, I don't like that. Let's add a background to this, shall we? And the way we're going to add a background is we're going to load a bitmap, or a JPEG in this case. We're going to create a texture brush based on that bitmap, and then we're going to fill our client rectangle with that. So if we just close this, you can see we've actually painted the background of this form with a brush that's based on a bitmap. But to be honest, that's a little bright. I mean, I'm kind of a pixel guy myself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a white wash over the top of that to tone it down a little bit. So what I've done is I've taken a color and I've added an alpha blend to it, so it's white, it's translucent. And again, I've painted a client rectangle with that. So you can see that kind of tones it down a little, but you can still see the bitmap behind it. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, because this conference is about the net, about the web, is I'm going to go and load an image from my website. I'm going to display that in the form. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the system.net part of the .NET framework, which allows you to do TCP/IP communication. So you can see here I create a web request to my bitmap on my server. I get that back into a memory stream, and I read that into a bitmap, and then I simply draw the bitmap on the form. And you can see there we have my PDC logo up there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want it to be a bit brighter than this, so we'll add a nice gradient-filled box. So you can I create a rectangle, I create a linear gradient brush that fades from red to yellow diagonally, and then I just fill the rectangle with it. And that's that there. Next thing, well, I'd like some text on there. And rather than just being like black or blue text, whatever, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load another image. I'm going to create a texture brush on it. So I've now got a brush that's going to paint that marbled effect. I'm going to create a font and a solid brush that's black. So this is going to give me my shadowed effect. I'm now going to draw my shadow using that alpha blended black brush. And then I'm going to draw my title text with the bitmap fill brush. So if we get that up there, you can see I've got my nice marbled effect with a shadow behind it. If you look closely at the shadow, you can actually see the bitmap through it. My next effect is it's a graphics path. So I'm going to define a fairly complex path. I admit this is pretty complex. I copied this code from somebody on the GDI Plus team who knew what they were doing with complex paths. So I create myself a gradient brush with that path and give it a set of colors I want to use, and then just fill the path. And you can see I get a nice pretty shade with the light shining on it, and that's quite pretty. I like that a lot. And then the final thing I'm going to do is show you a piece of Japanese text. And again, I'm running on a US system here, but WinForms uses Unicode throughout. GDI Plus supports Unicode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create my Japanese Mincho font, and I'm going to use a linear gradient brush to draw that, because of course I can't just use a simple color because we've got all these other special effects on here. So when you look at the font on the screen, it'll fade from blue to red. Here's my Japanese text, which, because I'm on a US system, I'm actually putting in the Unicode values of the characters. And then I'm going to display it here. And you can see there's my nice piece of Japanese text with the red to blue fade on it. So that's some of the features of GDI Plus. There's a GDI Plus talk, I think, either today or tomorrow that'll fill you in on the details of that a little more. So, some other points I wanted to bring up. At this point, you're probably sitting there saying, if you're like me, wow, that's really pretty cool. What about all the stuff I've got now? How am I going to get this together? Well, you can WinForms can host ActiveX controls. You can simply take an ActiveX control off the toolbar in Visual Studio, drop it on a form, and we do all the work to get that ActiveX control hosted on a form. And then you can use that ActiveX control as though it were a WinForm control. And going in the other direction, we actually implement all of the ActiveX control interfaces on our base control class. So you can build a WinForm control, and you can very simply host that in a VB6 application or in Office or so on. As I mentioned, we've done a lot of work to make sure WinForms is really strong in the international market with fully Unicode on NT, internally Unicode on 95 and 98. And then the final point I wanted to make is that we have a really great flexible licensing architecture that supports not only WinForms controls, but WebForms controls, web services, allows you to actually make some money out of your hard work, which is always a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to drill down to a couple of areas. The first area is security. So as I mentioned, the Common Language Runtime has security infrastructure that implements code access security. So what this means is that the Common Language Runtime verifies your application to make sure it's not doing any naughty things with pointers or out-of-band memory. And then it actually makes sure that when you try and perform an operation, not only do you have permission to perform that operation, but everybody who called you has permission to perform that operation. And then in the .NET framework, we take advantage of that security structure to allow us to implement WinForms and then allow you to use that in a semi-trusted or untrusted environment. So, for instance, if you take the system.io file class, you can use that to open a file. You put a file name and an access method, say a read access method. What the file class does at that point is it makes sure that you have the file I/O permission and that you've been granted file I/O read permission to that particular file. If you don't have the read permission, it will throw an exception and you won't be able to open the file. code access is controlled by permissions. There are a whole set of permissions, file I/O permission, UI permission that allows you to display windows, and so on and so forth. And the permission architecture is extensible, so you can define your own permissions. Then from an administration point of view, you group sets of permissions together into permission sets. So as an administrator of a corporation or your own machine or whatever, you can create permission sets that say you're allowed file I/O access to my documents, you're allowed registry access to HKey current user, you're allowed to display windows, you're allowed access to the clipboard. You can define as many different permission sets as you need. Then you associate permission sets with code groups. Now, by default, when you install the runtime, there are a set of code groups that map to the zones in IE. So there's a My Computer zone, and an intranet zone, and an internet zone, and a trusted zone. And we have a default set of permission sets for each of those. So, but again, that's extensible. You can define your own code groups. You can define your own permission sets. But by doing this, you can explicitly control what applications have what level of access to the resources on your machine. So moving on and talking about browser integration. WinForms controls can be hosted natively in Internet Explorer 5 and upwards. Again, because of all the work we've done with versioning and deployment and those kind of things, these controls are very low impact. No installation, no registration. It comes down onto your machine. It lives in assembly cache. When you've finished using it, it gets garbage collected by the assembly cache. Because of the security infrastructure, these controls are safe. You can navigate to a web page that contains a control, and you know, either as an administrator of a network or as your particular machine, that this control will have no more access than you, that controls coming from that place are allowed. And the benefit of this is that you get no horrible security dialogues in Internet Explorer where the user is forced to make a choice as to whether they fully trust your control or not. Controls are lightweight. A Hello World control is about 3.5K. I have bitmaps on most of my web pages that are bigger than that. And again, these controls are easily deployed. For instance, I have a chart control that references a chart engine control. A reference to the chart control in my web page. I download the web page. The runtime looks at that, understands that the chart engine is needed, and downloads that automatically. You don't actually have to do anything to get it to your local machine. So let's actually demo that now. And I remember to do it this time. That's good. Always good. So let's just open this up. And while that's opening up, I'll just show. So initially, I'm just going to show you the chart control. This is running as a WinForms application. So this control has full trust. So I have a chart control here. It has gradient fill on it. Kind of cool. I can come in here and I can load my own chart values. So you can see I've actually added the UK. This pig eye in production across the world from 1998 to 1992. I thought that would be pretty valuable information for you guys. So that's the control running in a WinForms application. Now I've actually done nothing to, I've got my control in Visual Studio here. I've actually done nothing to that control, get it to run in the browser. It's exactly the same control. If we go and look at the web page, and we look at the object tag, you can see that what we have here is no GUIDs. We simply have a reference to the assembly containing the control and the fully qualified name of control. Now, it's very important to realize that this is not the same as GUID-based activation. This is actually activated through the runtime, so it's activated in the correct security context, and the correct level of code access security is applied. So if we actually now run this, and you can see I'm actually building it, displaying the control. What's happening now is the control is being downloaded into the assembly cache and then being loaded into IE. So you can see I've actually got my control here now.
But Mark, what about the load button?
No, the load button loads a file. So let's go try load a file again. God, we'll wasted here, aren't we? We should be on stage. If I hit load now, oh my goodness me, you can see here, I have actually got, I've requested the file I/O permission, and that permission has failed because I'm running this control off a site that doesn't have file I/O permission. You can see it's perfectly safe. So some more things to notice here is, well, I've got my, you guys probably can't read that. Let's just go and do what you always do in IE when you can't read something. Let's change the text size. And you can see the text size on the control has actually changed with it. This is because we pick up the ambient properties from IE and actually reflect them. But wait, there's more. Okay, so you notice how I'm using the neat shortcut features in Visual Studio here. So let's beige. It's a bit of a pale colour. Let's go pink. Okay, so now we can save our style sheet. You'll notice I'm actually updating the CS style sheet for this web page. We'll hit F5, and you can see we've actually picked up that background colour in the page. The charts reflect changes. Thank you. And then I have one more thing to show you. I think everybody I work with has pointed out I spelled customize wrong. It's because I'm English, we don't know how to spell. So what I'm going to do now is, you see, I've got my customization dialog for the chart, and you can see what I have here is actually the property browser that I was using in Visual Studio. Exactly the same control. I just simply pointed to the object that represents a chart line. And I can, let's go to the USA, I'll change this from green to chartreuse. What a beautiful colour. We'll change this, and you can see I'm actually here. The WinForms architecture actually recognises that this is a colour object, picks the right picker for it. I've had to do no work to get this to work. I'll change this to dot dash, and we'll make this really large because this is the US we're talking about. And you can, I picked a bad colour, but can you see that? Yes, I think it shows on the monitor better than it does on my screen. Sorry? So you can do the lines, and you'll also notice that the line itself is alpha blended, so you can see the grid behind it. So there we are. That's controls in the browser. So what I've shown you there is a control running in the browser in the correct security context, only able to access the resources I've said it's allowed to access. The control... sorry, would you mind holding on to that question until the end, because we're running a little short of time. I want to give Fred time to do his thing. So if you step up to the mic at the end and ask the same question again, and I'll talk about it then. Look at this, I'm the king of this now. So I've just got a couple more things to talk about, and then I'm going to hand over to Fred, who's got lots of interesting things to show you. So licensing, as I mentioned, we think licensing is pretty important. We think it's pretty important that you guys ought to be able to make money out of your hard work. So we have an extensible licensing model. So you can, we've implemented a default license provider that's completely interoperable with the lick file-based ActiveX licensing model, so that if you're building a classic control and you're happy with the lick file model, you can continue to use that with no work. But we've also defined the licensing architecture in an extensible way. So for instance, if you have a web service or a web form control, then maybe a lick file, i.e. the guy who buys your control pays one license for it, is not what you want to do, because there are going to be thousands and thousands of users hitting that guy's website just to see your control, if nothing else. And so what you can do is you can extend our licensing architecture. You could, for instance, define a licensing scheme based on the number of processors on a particular box, the number of servers in a web garden or a web farm, the number of users who hit the site in a month or per hour, and so on and so forth. We also support the concept of design time and runtime licensing. So if your business model is that you want to license the design time, so developers have to pay for it, but the runtime is free, then you can do that. If you want to do the other way, design time is free to get people hooked on your stuff, and then they have to pay a runtime license. You can do that, or you can do a combination of both. And then the final thing I want to talk about for the VB guys in the audience, is how this meshes with VB6. There's a lot of cool new features here. that you can exploit using Visual Basic.NET. I showed you the GDI Plus demo. It was completely built in Visual Basic. So if you start with Visual Basic 6 project, there is actually a project conversion wizard. So just in the same way that in previous versions of Visual Basic, you could open up your previous projects and they get automatically converted. We have a similar mechanism. It copies your Visual 6 project, Basic 6 project, leaves that project alone, and then converts it. It's pretty cool technology. It's not on the PDC CD though, so don't panic. It is there. You won't see it in this release. We're working out exactly when that's going to be released, but it's going to be sometime in the near future. Couple of caveats. You will need to rewrite some code. It's not going to be a 100% process. We're going to do the best possible job we can. Your forms will all be automatically translated, but if you've got some hairy piece of code that uses a VB6 feature that's not in Visual Basic.NET, then you will have to rewrite that. We will actually push to-do comments, which will show up in the task list in Visual Studio, to help you understand what has and hasn't been converted. And a full report is generated to help you understand as well. And of course, we'll be providing white papers, courses, books, samples, and training to help you convert your Visual Basic 6 applications. So, I've shown you web services and WinForms. I've shown you controls running in the browser. I've shown you some pretty cool GDI Plus stuff. But now I'm going to hand you over to Fred, and Fred's going to show you how to build a WinForms application. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Mark. That was pretty good. So I'm going to talk about building a basic WinForms application. I don't have a lot of time because Mark nudged it on me, but that's okay because I talk really fast anyways. So WinForms is about forms. A form is what we know as a simple window, right? It's got a maximize, it's got a minimize, a close, takes care of painting, we can resize it, all that good stuff. Well, forms are pretty useless if the user can't interact with your application. So that's what controls are for. Most basic control I can think of off the top of my head is a button. Right? I think we all saw the ones that Mark referred to in his slides. There's all kinds of controls, views, list views, whatever. Events. So events, cause and effect. So the whole idea about having a Windows application with a button on it, for example, is the fact that, well, my application needs to let me know when that button was clicked. And that's what an event's all about. So when the user presses the button, fires an event. We'll get into that in all kinds of ways. So let's look at the code, what the code needs to look like for a simple form. All I'm doing here is I declare class, I'm calling it my form, whatever. And that extends from form, it inherits from form. I have two methods in here. I have a main, and I have the constructor, my form. So what happens in the main is I instantiate a new instance of my form, then I call application.run. That's really all I need to do to get it to pop up there. I like to set properties on my controls, on my forms, and I like to do that in the constructor. It makes sense to do it there. Don't have to. So what I did was I said this.text equals hello world, and this.backcolor equals colors.slateblue. This obviously refers to my form instance. So, set 3. Look at that. So if you see right here, this is Visual Studio. I should have mentioned this is Sharp, the language. What you see here in Visual Studio is exactly what I just talked about in that last slide. Here's my form. It's got two methods. And, well, here you go. Standard Windows application. I wrote very little code to do that. Works great. It's lightweight. Does that not hold? Oops, I missed that one. Nope. Well, you'd think I'd have that down by now, huh? Okay, so it was a great little demo, whatever, but it's pretty useless, right? There was no way to interact with the user, drag it around, show all your friends, but there's no fun doing that. So what we need to do is, let's talk about what it takes to add a control. Okay, like I said before, when I set properties, I like to do it in the constructor. Like you saw me say, this.text equals this, this.backcolor equals this. So I'm going to do this in the constructor as well. What I'm doing is instantiating a new button. I then set 3 properties on that button. There's many, many properties on a button, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But button1.location is equal to something. I set the size, and I set the text to click me. That's all I can think of. Finally, this last line, this.controls.add. This refers to my form, my class. The controls is the controls collection, and all I'm doing is I'm adding this button so the form knows, oh, look at this. Here's a control. No problem. So this.controls.add button 1 is the last thing I have to do to get a control to show up on the form. Control state is modeless. This is a real important part. Traditionally, writing a Windows application kind of set up the control. For example, creating a button, I would have to say, okay, well, here's text. This is how big I want it to be. This is what it should look like. Go ahead and create it, poof, and it's done. And that's about as much you can do with it. Well, since our control state is modeless, we can set these properties at any time. For example, if all of a sudden I want the button to, say, disappear, change size, change location, while the user hovers over it, for example, I can do that. I can do this at any time, and that's because control state is modeless. Let's drill into events. So, like I said before, events is cause and effect kind of thing. When the user clicks on a button, I want to know, well, what's going on, when they clicked it, as well as some other interesting things. So, how do we handle an event? Well, first, we simply add an on-click event to the button 1. So, in the constructor, next to all the other properties I'm setting, I'm going to say button1.add-on-click, a new event handler, button click. And what that does is, okay, as soon as this button gets clicked, let's invoke the button click method. And if you see below, I have a button click method here, and it's pretty much useless. Just say messagebox.show hello WinForms world. So, more depth about events. There's two event classes. There's the event handler delegate, and this is what hooks the event up to methods. That was what I just did. Button1.add-on-click, you know. And secondly, there's the event args. Now, the event args are interesting. In your method, your event handling method that you set up, you get passed in two things. The sender, two arguments, excuse me. The sender and the event args. The event args contain interesting information about the events. Well, a click event isn't interesting. It was clicked, right? But what about a mouse down, right? A mouse move. Well, where's the mouse cursor at? What are the mouse button stages right now? Are they down? Are they up? All this kind of stuff I can get in my event handling method by just simply querying my event args class. Every method has every control has three event methods. There's an add-on, there's a remove on, and there's an on. So, for example, back to what I was doing, there was an add-on click, which you saw, a remove on click, which I didn't do, but let's say, well, I no longer want to see this message. I just don't want to do anything. Well, you can simply remove your event as well. And there's an on click. And the on click is kind of the big part behind the whole method, right? What that does is it surfaces and invokes your method you set up, like button 1 click. Okay, so we have a button, we added the click, and we have a method which says messagebox.show. Well, how would you do that for a second button? Pretty much the same way, right? I'm instantiating a second button, I add the on click, and I have another method. Another way to do this, if you'll notice here, that button1.add-on-click and button2.add-on-click both refer to the same event handling method. I just called it button clicked. And in this button click method, I'm actually sorting out who's seeing this information. By looking at the information I'm getting passed in. So I say, if the sender is button 1, then say something, otherwise say something else, right? Pretty straightforward. So, I got that. So let's do this in the designer right here. First of all, I know the people in the back won't be able to see the font when I run a standard Hello World app. So I'm actually going to drag a font declaration in here. And if you'll see, it's a long line of code, I know. I create a new font object, Microsoft Sans Serif, 19 size, bolded, all kinds of stuff on there. So now, when you run the application, my guess is the people in the back will be able to read the control. Here we go, instantiating my first button. We all saw that. And like I said, I don't have to set the properties in the constructor, but I like to. So in my constructor, I'm just doing exactly what I talked about. This is my this.controls.add. That actually adds it to the form. And I add the event add-on click right here. I'm referring to the button click method, but I don't have one yet. So I'll go down here. Oops. And here we go. Here's my event handling method, right? Button click. All I do is just show a silly little message box. Okay, can you read the font in the back? Good. So, as you see, I clicked on the button, created the button click event, and it popped this message box, which I know you can't read. Hello, WinForms world. So let's just take that one step further and do a second button. Declared it right there. Go to my constructor. Excuse me. Go to my constructor. Set the properties on it. I'm going to take this. I'm going to enter this fancy little event handling method right here. Button 1, button 2. Sorts it out just like I did in the slides. So, click me. This says button 1 is pushed. This is button 2 is pushed. So you see it works really well. It's very simple to do. No, not yet. Phew. What a lot of code. I've done that a lot. But wait, Visual Studio does all this for you and more. So watch this. I'm actually going to do this in Visual Basic to show you that I can do it in any language I want. I'm going to create a new Windows application. Where do you want me to put this? He's really picky about where I create my projects.
I'm going to use Katrina.
So you see, okay, well, I have my standard form, right? That's step 1. If I go over here, pull out this properties thing so we all can see it, pin it down. What you can see is all these properties that I can adjust at any point in time, not just here, on my form. So I think I had a crazy back color or something like that. So I'm going to change it to, no, that's not fun. What else we got? Oh, here's some good colors. I'm going to change it to this color because Mark's really into green colors. Come back here, and I'm going to say, well, my last little demo that I wrote before had a button on it. So I'm going to grab this button, drag it right over here. Maybe I'll resize it. Come here. I got all kinds of issues. I'm going to go to this button, and you know that now that it has focus, you can see the properties on the button. I'm going to make the modifier property of the button public, and you'll see why in a little bit. I can also add a second button, right? No problem. Well, what happens if I click on button 1? It actually auto-generates the code. So, hold on 1 second. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. Where the hell is this? Oh, sorry. Mark hides stuff from me. All right, there we go. Sorry. So let's do this again here. Okay, second button. Everybody's happy. Look at this. I can do this. I can grab the first button, double-click on it, and notice that all the code the designer generated for me while I was doing this. Now, we can go in here and we can modify anything we want, but you'll see that this is not a lot different than the code that I wrote, right? We have our form 1, which inherits the system.winforms.form. We have a couple components, which we instantiate. We have our constructor. And then down here we have some properties, such as location, size, tab index, text that have been set on the control. I'm going to go down to here. This was, the skeleton of this method was actually auto-created for me when I double-clicked on the button. That's because it invoked default event. I'm going to go here and type in, I hate these newfangled keyboards. Oops, should I spell that right? So I'm just going to do hello. And at the end of my line, I'll put a semicolon. Well, Mark is really picky about that, so I got this big sticky on my laptop right here, no semicolon, so I won't do that. Yeah, I really appreciated that. So anyways, okay, great. Button 1, hello, no problem. Well, my other app, I actually had this, each click fire both of those. Excuse me, each click, the button on clicking on each button, I actually had fire go to the same event. So what I can do here is I can select the second button and move up here to the Events tab. Now, these are all the events I can deal with on my second button. I can pull this down and say, yeah, button click. I know it's button one click. I know I can rename it if I want. But for now, I'm just going to say, okay, well, when you click, you fire button one click event as well. So if you see that I click on either button now, it both routes to that same event. Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I did this before, remember? There we go. So I'm going to switch back. So what did we do? Well, we created a form. That was that my form extend class. I had two methods. I had that main. I had the constructor. It was pretty simple. You saw it come up. It was useless, but it was simple. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Secondly, we added controls. I added two buttons, I think. I had some, of course you can add any kind of control you want. I just had a basic control on there. We handled the events, right? When the button was clicked, invoke a method. I put all kinds of code in there. And finally, you saw how I can do that in Designer really quickly. I know it's getting late. So the one last thing I want to talk about is, real quickly, visual inheritance. So WinForms is based on inheritance, and our designer handles this just incredibly well. What we can do is, just like Mark's sample, if you have a graphics designer company and they design a form, they have a couple fancy controls on there, maybe a logo, things look really good, and what you want to do is you want to hand that off to someone else and have them add additional functionality to that. It's really easy. Let's just go back to the last project here. And you'll see that, okay, here's this form, if you remember. I'm going to go to, see, Mark hides all these for me. All right, I'm going to go, well, I want to add a new item to this. You know what I want to add? I want to add inherited form. Can I call it form 2? Is that cool?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to say, oh, look at this. My inherit ticker pops up and says, oh, we'd like to inherit from form 1, which is in your project right now. And I said, sure, that sounds really good. So now if you notice, form 2 has been added. And this is actually inherited from the first one, right? I haven't done anything yet. I haven't dragged these controls on here. Now, this guy, I didn't change the modifiers. And note, I inherited from him, but the base class isn't going to let me do anything. These are disabled right here, these properties, because I can't really change any of this, right? I got this free, though. If you look at this, since I made the modifiers public, the button's here, but I can still change it. Still move it around, resize it, all that good stuff. So to summarize, WinForms, I'll just read this verbatim. WinForms is the way to write rich client controls and applications. The controls are secure, lightweight, support hosting and web pages, and it's really good fun to write really great WinForms apps. Some related sessions, I think they're all in your little slides that you have, so I won't leave that up there too long. Also, check out the WinForms Quick Start in the SDK. Mark and I will do our best to answer questions, and are we over?
No, we're fine.
And when we run out of time, we'll meet you outside to follow up.
And we'll be at the Ask the Experts tomorrow night, so you can come and ask us questions there as well. So there's two microphones, either one over there and one there. The guy with his hand up in the middle there.
You showed how you can instantiate a WinForm in the browser as a control.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to instantiate the way you could with an ActiveX document to go to the whole screen real estate of the browser and do the menu negotiation?
No, there isn't a way to do that. You can have a link to an executable and actually run an executable from a link, and it will still execute in the correct.
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Fred's pointing out I should read the question. So the gentleman was asking whether we could do, whether we have something similar to ActiveX documents, where we took over the whole browser and did menu negotiation. I was just explaining that wasn't a feature we supported, and there were some alternatives for doing that. The guy over there at the microphone?
I have two questions.
Uh-huh.
First question is, do you support any of the document view kind of stuff that MFC does?
No, we don't have direct support for MFC-style document view.
Okay. Second question. Suppose I develop a WinForms app and I'm ready to install this on somebody's machine. Mm-hmm. I assume it's a Windows 2000 machine.
Right.
What sort of runtime support do I have to install first?
You have to have the .NET runtime installed. So you have to have the framework and the common language runtime installed in order to run the WinForms application.
Is there an installer for that already?
I'm afraid I'm not the best person to ask that. If you come and ask me to ask the experts tomorrow night, I'll have an answer for you. I don't actually know the answer to that question.
Thanks.
This guy. See you right.
All right, sorry, the gentleman over there to my right.
Yes, your demos both show adding buttons to a form, and in both the case of Visual Basic, I think, as well as C#, it actually showed the generation of code that programmatically added the buttons to the form.
That's correct.
In WinForms, is there an equivalent to the resource file, or is everything programmatically added to the form?
So what happens is, yes, there is an equivalent, is the simple answer. So what happens is, as you manipulate the control, the properties about the control that are not localizable or don't use bitmaps or images or that kind of thing are actually written as code in form. Then if you add an image or want to localize it to German, we actually create a resource file and then persist your changes, those things to a resource file.
Okay, yeah, I was curious because oftentimes when you localize dialogues and so forth, you have to resize controls because of the differences in sizes of the different languages.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things the designer supports actually inside Visual Studio is switching to a different language, and then any of the properties that are marked as localizable on the form, you can then change, and they'll be recorded in a resource file. So you can design your form in US English, switch to German, then make the changes as are necessary, so change sizes, change text, maybe change some images, those kind of things, and they'll be persisted into a German resource file. Then both the US and the German resources will be packaged into the assembly. When you execute the application on the platform, it checks what language you're running in and loads the correct resource file.
Thank you.
The gentleman over there in the red shirt.
Hello.
Hi there.
Now, the data-bound controls are part of WinForms. Is that correct?
Yeah, the data-bound controls I showed are part of WinForms,
Okay.
yes.
When I'm doing, I have a VB6 app that's being converted. I can see how the forms get converted and everything, but it looks like all the data-bound controls work only with ADO+. So what happens with all the incredible number of lines of ADO code I have, and how do I integrate that in a WinForm and a .NET application? Or does it get modified when we...
So your ADO code will continue to work because we have really good interoperability with COM2. Exactly how the controls get migrated, I'm not exactly sure. If there's the VB Project Manager, Dave Mendlin, you should be able to find him in the press room downstairs, room 202. He'd be able to answer that question more accurately than I can.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you have layout managers that you can attach to the web forms, or is it strictly XY?
So we have a couple of layout behaviors. One's called anchoring, where you anchor the edges of the control container. So if you say anchor a control, so the left and right, anchor the left and right, then as you move forward, the control will move, which is what I showed with the entry fields on the data entry form. We also have another layout called docking, which is you can dock a control to one side or another of a form, and that's, for instance, how you build something like, say, the Explorer tree view with the directories on one side and the files on them split between it. Our layout manager is they're the two that we provide, but we also provide a mechanism to allow you to define your own layout manager beyond that. Typically, we found that those two things are enough for most applications.
See you right.
Sorry? The guy over there in the green shirt.
If you made changes to the base form after you created the inherited form,
yes.
What would we see happen with the inherited form next time we opened it?
So the inherited form would actually pick up those changes. I mean, Fred didn't demonstrate it here, but if we'd gone to the base form, so let me explain in a bit more detail. If the control is protected or public, and you've made modifications on the derived form, those modifications will take precedence. So, for instance, if you have a button down at the bottom right-hand corner, and in your derived form you move it up to the top right-hand corner, and you go back to the base form, change the size, and you change the location. When you go back to the derived form, the size will have changed because you haven't overridden that, but the location will remain where you put it on the derived form because you overrode that behavior. Gentleman over there.
A lot of this stuff seems like deja vu from VJ++, the programming model and all that sort of thing. The one difference that I saw was there, when we switched to code view, the IDE makes it very clear what the GUI mode was generating and didn't let you screw that up.
Yeah.
Is that just not there yet, or?
Okay, so there are a couple of things. Yes, in VJ6, what we did was to make that code area read only. When we implemented WinForms, we looked at that behavior, and our parsers are actually a lot more intelligent now, and we can cope much more robustly with you changing that. Typically, you won't want to change it. If you add arbitrary code in there, we will typically ignore it, or it will get thrown away. So we say don't touch that. So what we're doing, you won't see it here. You'll see it in beta 2. You saw the collapse to definition thing I used. Well, we'll be using that collapse feature to collapse the initialized component, so it's there, and you get to it if you need to, but it's not in your face. It's not getting in the way of your code. So I actually feel that that's a much better solution because you can get to it if you need to, but I found it very frustrating when I was building a form and lots of control on it that I had this chunk of code, yay big, that wasn't my code and I didn't want to ever touch. So I think collapsing is a much nicer solution for that. I'm getting a thumbs up. I'm happy. Gentleman over there in the red shirt.
Yeah, could you explain why we use WinForm instead of an ActiveX control for a visual control?
Security. The fact that we have code access security, the fact that the runtime verifies the code is making legal calls, the fact that we're registration free, no touch deployment. You can install the control. When you install the control, you know it's not going to affect any other application on the machine. You know that it's not going to have any side effects.
And then the opposite is, why would I choose an ActiveX control, would you think, over WinForm?
Why would you choose an ActiveX control over WinForm?
Or are you guys not the right person to ask?
I'm probably not the right person to ask. The one reason I can think of is you're targeting in an environment that doesn't have the runtime installed on it. But if I were doing that, I'd probably build a web form rather than an ActiveX control, to be honest.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a similar question, but related to HTC controls.
HTC controls?
Yeah, when you target browser environment, what should you use, WinForm controls or HTC?
These are behaviors, yes? E5 behaviors. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do and the scenario you're trying to hit. HTCs are very good for environments where you know you have IE5 installed, where you can do what you need to do with script. But there are some limitations to what you can do with script. It's a difficult environment to develop for and to debug in. It's much nicer to be able to use an environment where you can write in type language, where you have really first-class development support. I can't give you a right answer or a wrong answer. It's simply, what are you trying to do? You have a set of choices. You have web forms, which provides a really rich server-based programming model. You have WinForms, which provides a really rich Win32 programming model. You have Behave, which provide a really rich programming model inside IE5. And you can use a combination of those. You can even have, say, a web form control that sniffs the browser type. In NAV3, downloads HTML. In IE5, without the runtime, downloads a behavior. In IE5, with runtime, downloads a WinForms control. I mean, you can really mix and match those, depending on what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it.
So in the long term, they are going to coexist? It's not going to
I think in the long term, they're going to coexist, and what you'll see is a merge of those models. So if you look at WinForms and WebForms, we've done a lot of work, despite the programming model differences, to make the programming models similar. So WinForms is control and event form-based in a similar manner. WebForms is control and event and form-based. And so I think you'll see us carrying that strategy forward.
Thank you.
Any plans to support non-rectangular forms?
It's funny you should say that. So we have a WinForms, I don't want to steal Sean's thunder, so I'm not going to show you. But if you come along to the WinForms Advanced talk at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, drag yourself out of bed, get your bum in this same room. Sean will be demonstrating some really cool UI features that goes way beyond what I showed today.
Good answer.
Yes, sir. Was there anybody else? Are we done? Okay, very much, guys. Okay, sorry.
That alpha blending, is that going to Windows 2000 only?
No.
Good. Another good answer.
We are continuing to do it. We have done and are continuing to performance test and benchmark WinForms, yes. And it shows that by the time we ship, we should be comparable with VB6, I would say. I mean, we're still working on it. If you use the PDC release, you'll see it isn't as fast as VB6 now, but we've already made progress beyond where we are with the PC release. It's one of our big focuses now that we're feature complete. We want to make sure that we're performance complete as well. Yes, sir.
You made a good point that you can do the web style controls.
Yeah.
So the stupid question is, can you do the old Windows style 3D button look?
Yes, I happen to be in love with the flat look. The button has 3 styles. It has standard classic Windows 3D look, a pop-up look where it's flat until you move the mouse over it, and then flat style that highlights. So I think we've just about run out of time now, so I'm going to take the mic off. We're going to pack up our stuff and move to the back of the room. So if there's anybody who has any other questions, come join us at the back of the room.